There are things a parent should never expect from their child, but most only realize this too late, when silence takes the place of conversation and the gesture they longed for never comes. So many parents grow old, believing that one day their child will return the favor, offer care, show affection, as if the love once given were a check with a guaranteed return date. But today's world doesn't operate on emotional guarantees. And according to Confucius, a parent's heartbreak begins precisely where their wisdom ends. Have you ever felt like something broke between you and your child, but you can't quite say when? Maybe it was in that cold response, that distant look, or the moment you realized that despite everything you've done, you're no longer a priority. That growing sense of abandonment, it doesn't come with shouting or arguments. Just a slow drifting away from someone who was raised to fly, and who once airborne forgot where the nest is. Confucius once said, "He who expects a return for what he has done, did it not out of virtue, but out of desire." And that's where many parents stumble, because the expectation of gratitude is love's most disguised poison. They don't teach this in schools. You won't see it in Father's Day commercials. But it's a harsh truth. Children owe us nothing, not even when we've sacrificed everything. This is the part of parenting that doesn't fit in family portraits, the part that hurts, but can also set you free. In this video, we'll open a wound many hide out of shame, the quiet pain of feeling unappreciated. We'll walk through the teachings of Confucius, the sage who over 2.5 millennia ago understood the deep complexities of family bonds, to uncover why expecting too much from a child can destroy not only the relationship, but the soul of the parent. And more importantly, how to heal that hurt without becoming a prisoner to it. Get ready for a journey that goes far beyond modern psychology, because here we won't speak of family duties, we'll speak of wisdom, not of guilt, but of awareness. If you're a parent, a child, or somewhere in between, this video isn't just about you, it's about what connects us and what quietly tears us apart, because sometimes true love means understanding that the return may never come, and yet loving anyway. Have you ever noticed that the more you expect something from someone, the more painful it becomes when it never arrives? A parent's heart often deceives itself, planting affection like seeds, believing they'll one day blossom into gratitude. But according to Confucius, true virtue lies in acting without expectation. For him, the value of a gesture is found in the gesture itself, not in the echo it might produce in the future. He who loves in hopes of being loved back is not loving. He is investing emotionally, hoping for a return. This is a silent wound that spreads across generations. Parents who gave everything, hoping one day to receive the same, and children who walk away without looking back. Confucius warns that a good deed done in anticipation of repayment is no longer a good deed. It becomes an emotional contract, poorly disguised. And when that contract is broken, what remains is not just sadness but disillusionment, not from a lack of love but from an excess of hope. It's like building a bridge for someone to cross and then feeling hurt because they didn't return to say thank you. Confucius would say, wisdom lies in understanding that your bridge served its purpose in that moment, even if they never come back. That doesn't diminish your virtue. It simply confirms the other person's freedom. True love builds paths, but never demands traffic in return. And that perhaps is the hardest lesson for a heart that has given everything. Parents who raise children under the weight of emotional debt, even if unspoken, fail to realize they are growing a bond laced with poison. The child doesn't grow in freedom, but under the shadow of obligation. And eventually that shadow becomes unbearable. Confucius knew that no virtue can blossom under the weight of expectation. That's why he proposed an ethic of pure action. Do good for the sake of harmony, not for a return. And this requires rare greatness, the kind that lets go of the need for recognition. In this video, you will come to understand how this philosophy can reshape the way parents and children relate. We'll explore the Confucian principles that guide not only individual behavior, but also the invisible threads that tie generations together. Because sometimes to find peace in the present, you must release the weight of future expectations. And perhaps, just perhaps, That quiet surrender is the very key to reconnecting what seemed forever lost. Confucius believed that the family is the first school of virtue, but not through control, rather through example. A father who cultivates his own character instead of trying to mold his child's future is already teaching the greatest of lessons. Children don't grow from instructions. They grow from impressions. They don't mirror what we tell them, they mirror who we are. And this is where many parents misplace their energy, demanding a harvest from seeds they never truly sowed. When a father says, "I gave you everything," the child often hears, "Now you owe me." But love, when burdened with obligation, becomes a prison. Confucius taught that harmony arises not when everyone fulfills duties under pressure, but when each acts according to their place, with inner virtue. A child who serves out of guilt will always seek distance. A child who witnesses dignity, patience, and wisdom may one day return, not out of debt but out of reverence. We tend to forget that love offered freely often finds its way back, not on schedule, not in predictable ways, but in gestures born from genuine remembrance. And yet many parents grow bitter, not because their children are ungrateful, but because their own expectations were never voiced, understood, or even fair. Confucius would ask, "Did you give because it was right, or because you hoped to be remembered?" That answer changes everything. In trying to shape their children's paths, some parents forget to walk their own. They become consumed with the outcomes of others' lives, rather than embodying the wisdom they wish to see reflected. Confucius warned against this inversion of responsibility. He urged each person to cultivate their inner rectitude before seeking external obedience. When a father is anchored in integrity, his presence speaks louder than any reprimand. So before we ask, "Why has my child drifted away?" Confucius would prompt us to ask, "Have I remained close to my own virtue?" Because closeness isn't built through demand, but through magnetic grace. The most powerful legacy a parent can leave is not a list of sacrifices, but a silent presence that taught, healed, and forgave without ever needing applause. Time, Confucius reminds us, does not wait. And yet, many parents live as if the clock will pause until the child is ready to understand their pain. They delay forgiveness, affection, understanding, until one day there is no more time left. They hope that when the child matures, they'll finally get it. But sometimes the child never does, and the parent is left holding a bouquet of unspoken words that now weigh more than silence. One of Confucius' deepest teachings is that virtue is not measured by results, but by intention. The father who opens his heart today, even without a reply, is already walking the path of the noble man. He does not withhold love to punish. He does not guard wisdom out of resentment. He speaks because it is right to speak. He forgives because it is right to forgive, not because the child deserves it, but because he himself has matured beyond blame. This mindset is not passive, it is powerful. It allows the parent to stop waiting and start living, no longer tied to imaginary timelines or emotional debts. They can breathe in the present. They can find meaning in who they are, not in who they are to others. And in this space of inner peace, something strange happens. Sometimes the child returns. But now it is different, because now the father is no longer begging for love. He is ready to give it freely. Confucius taught that to lead, one must first become what they wish to see. He did not preach control, he preached alignment. You do not teach humility by commanding silence. You do not teach patience by imposing urgency. You teach what you live. And if you live with expectation, your child will live with guilt. But if you live with integrity, your child may live with longing. Longing for the wisdom they once overlooked. Thus, the most effective invitation is not a complaint, it is a transformation. You do not call the child back with words of pain, but with a presence that emanates peace. Confucius believed that when the parent becomes a sanctuary, even the most distant heart may seek refuge there once more. Many parents confuse control with care. They believe that by managing every choice, they're protecting the child. But Confucius warned, what is forced does not endure. A tree that is bent too harshly will snap. A child whose spirit is constrained will either break or escape. And when they escape, It is not just distance. They leave behind an emotional absence that words cannot mend. The ancient sage understood that liberty guided by example is the root of filial harmony. Children do not become honorable by hearing lectures about respect. They learn by feeling respected. They do not stay close because they were guilted into love. They stay because something in them still feels safe in your presence. Confucius urged parents to ask not, "Why don't they call me?" but, "Do I embody the kind of presence worth calling?" This is a truth hard to swallow, that sometimes we've done everything we thought was right, and still, it wasn't what the child needed. Because righteousness without empathy becomes tyranny, discipline without warmth becomes distance, and intentions, no matter how noble, can still cause harm when unexamined. Confucius would not say, "You failed." He would say, "Reflect." Because reflection, more than regret, is the root of renewal. When we reflect not with self-blame, but with curiosity, we begin to see where our wounds shaped our parenting and where healing is still possible. Confucius believed the virtuous man is not flawless, but aware, not rigid, but evolving. And when a parent evolves, they grant permission for the child to return without shame, because now it's no longer about who was right, it's about who is ready. In this way, parenting becomes a second journey. The first was to raise a child. The second is to become someone worthy of being approached by the adult they became. And Confucius, even across centuries, gently reminds us, this transformation is always possible for those who choose wisdom over pride. There is a moment in every life when we realize we did not raise a child, we raised a person with their own pain, decisions, limitations, and blind spots. Confucius teaches that understanding the other is not to excuse them, but to free yourself from illusion. Many parents are trapped not by what their children do, but by the fantasy of what they hoped their children would be. This illusion, the perfect, grateful, present child, is quietly built over years. Every sacrifice adds a brick. Every sleepless night, another, until the image becomes a silent demand. Be who I dreamed you'd be. But when reality arrives, with flaws, distance, and disappointment, bitterness takes root. Confucius would gently dismantle this illusion. He would say, "Release what you expected. Embrace what is." When we strip away what we think the child owes us, we make room to see who they really are. And sometimes that vision is painful, but it is also freeing. Because now we are no longer negotiating love, we are offering it unconditionally. And that is the foundation of the Confucian ideal. Humaneness is not conditional. It flows from the noble heart. Even if your child never says thank you, even if they never return your calls, even if they never become what you hoped, they are still a human soul walking their own path. And you are still a parent with the power to choose dignity over despair. That choice, Confucius says, is the true measure of your strength. So don't wait for a moment that may never come. Be the person who loves with wisdom, who forgives with clarity, and who releases with peace. Not for them, but for yourself. Because in the end, Confucius teaches us this simple truth. To govern others is strength, but to govern yourself is virtue. There is a form of wisdom that only silence can teach, a silence not of absence, but of presence. Many parents try to fill the void between them and their children with explanations, accusations, or emotional pleas. But Confucius would suggest another approach. Become still enough to listen not to what is said, but to what is hidden. Sometimes the distance isn't rejection, it's confusion. Sometimes the silence of the child is the echo of our own unhealed voice. In Confucian philosophy, silence is not weakness, it is refinement. The noble person does not speak to be heard, he speaks when his words can uplift. Likewise, a parent does not need to fight for space in the child's heart. He needs only to remain rooted, like a mountain, unmoving, dignified, quietly present. That is the power of constancy. And when storms pass, as they always do, the child may return and find that mountain still there. But this requires discipline, the kind of emotional mastery that lets go of urgency. Confucius spoke of the way of the middle, where neither attachment nor abandonment rules the heart, to remain open yet not desperate, to remain loving yet not controlling. That is the fine art of the virtuous parent, one who lives not through emotional bargaining, but through internal balance. And in this balance, something profound emerges. The parent becomes not a figure of need, but a figure of strength, a silent anchor. And children, especially as they age, begin to see what they once ignored. The absence of judgment, the presence of quiet wisdom. It draws them in, not because they are told to come, but because something in them longs for that sanctuary. So while the world teaches parents to demand attention, Confucius teaches us to embody magnetism, not by striving, but by becoming. And in this becoming, the parent transcends the role of caregiver and steps into the timeless role of guide. Modern society often confuses achievement with virtue. Parents too fall into this trap, judging their success by their children's careers, homes, or how often they call. But Confucius would caution against measuring the soul with material yardsticks. The noble man seeks virtue, the small man seeks gain. If we only feel proud when the child succeeds and ashamed when they falter, we are loving a projection, not a person. Confucian virtue is found in the invisible, in the steadiness of a father who never speaks ill of his son, even in disappointment, in the mother who prays not for her daughter's success, but for her peace. These are not glamorous acts. No one applauds them. But they build something sacred, a bond that time cannot erode. Parents who live by this virtue carry themselves with quiet pride, not because their children reflect greatness, but because they themselves embody it. They've shifted the axis from "I gave you everything" to "I became everything I could." And that, Confucius teaches, is the only legacy that endures, not wealth, not recognition, but moral character silently passed down like a flame. This transformation does not erase the pain. It does not deny the tears cried in secret, but it gives them context. Confucius understood that suffering without reflection is torment, but suffering with insight is rebirth. Every wound becomes a lesson. Every absence becomes a call to inner presence, and every disappointment becomes an invitation to virtue. So when you feel forgotten, don't ask what you've lost. Ask what you are still becoming. Because perhaps, in the absence of your child's validation, you're being called to validate yourself, in the mirror of wisdom that no one can take from you. There is a quiet revolution that happens when a parent stops needing to be needed. It's not abandonment, it's liberation. Confucius would describe it not as letting go, but as stepping aside with grace. When the path is blocked, the noble man does not force passage, he prepares another way. That other way is internal. It is the path where love is no longer clinging, but flowing. Imagine for a moment that your child never comes back, never says thank you, never sees the sacrifices. Would you still choose to love, to forgive, to remain open? Confucius would say, yes, because your virtue was never about them. It was always about you. That is the turning point. When your goodness stops depending on their actions, you finally reclaim your power. This isn't easy. It feels like surrendering a part of yourself. But in truth, it's reclaiming the part that was never meant to depend on anyone else. Confucian wisdom teaches us that all relationships are opportunities, not guarantees. They are the mirrors through which we discover who we are and what we must refine. The parent who stops waiting begins to live, begins to laugh again, begins to create joy not from memories of a child's embrace, but from the dignity of standing whole. And strangely, this new self, calm, generous, unbothered, becomes more magnetic than ever before. The child who once ran may now for the first time feel curious to return, because the pressure is gone, the weight is lifted, and in its place stands a parent who is not begging to be loved, but who has become love itself. Confucius taught that all harmony begins within. The family, society, even the heavens reflect the order of the individual heart. A parent tormented by resentment cannot create peace around them. A parent healed by virtue becomes a light, not only for their children but for generations. This is legacy, not through name or blood, but through example. Every time you choose patience over frustration, you teach. Every time you respond with grace instead of anger, you model greatness. Not for applause, not for return, but because you are sculpting yourself into the kind of ancestor the future will honor, even if your own child never does. This is the deeper teaching of Confucius, that life is not about what we are owed, but about what we become. That family is not a contract, it is a calling, and that love, when rooted in character rather than expectation, becomes unshakable. It is no longer a transaction, it is a truth. Let your child become who they must, and become yourself, someone they cannot forget, even if they try. Because memory doesn't hold on to guilt. It holds on to goodness, and the goodness of a parent who loves with wisdom has a way of echoing through time, often long after they're gone. So perhaps your child is not ready now, perhaps they are still lost, still blind, but Confucius would say, keep your lamp lit, not for them to owe you, but so that one day, should they seek the way home, they'll find a light still burning. And here we arrive, not at the end, but at the threshold of transformation. You began this journey wondering what to expect from your grown child, but Confucius has gently turned the mirror. The real question was never about them. It was always about you, about what kind of soul you wish to embody, regardless of who notices. He would not promise reconciliation, he would not guarantee thanks, but he would offer something infinitely more valuable: peace. The kind of peace that arises not from fulfilled hopes, but from released illusions. The peace of knowing that you lived with honor, that you gave without keeping score, that you became someone your child may not fully understand, but will one day remember with awe. Perhaps not today, perhaps not even in your lifetime, but the virtue you carved into your days leaves marks deeper than memory. It becomes part of the soil they one day walk on. The silence you held, the wisdom you spoke, the love you gave when it wasn't returned, these become teachings that time cannot erase. So let go, not of love, but of demand. Let go, not of care, but of the weight that said, I need this back. Confucius does not teach resignation. He teaches transcendence, to give without losing, to love without tying, to forgive without forgetting who you are. And now you stand as something greater than a parent. You are a soul refined by fire, carved by reflection, and crowned by compassion. You have become so at the very lesson your child may one day come seeking. And now, as the last words settle into silence, you may feel something subtle shifting, not in your child, not in your past, but within you. Because perhaps for the first time, you've stopped asking why they didn't come back, and started realizing that what truly matters is who you became in their absence. Confucius didn't teach how to control people. He taught how to free yourself, free from expectation, free from bitterness, free to love with dignity and let go without losing yourself. Everything you've lived, every sleepless night, every unanswered message, every quiet ache is not erased by this understanding, but transfigured. Like a flame that no longer burns to consume, but to illuminate, your virtue, now detached from applause, becomes sacred. The echoes of what you gave without return are not lost. They are woven into the tapestry of who you are. And that, Confucius would say, is the highest form of reward. Not receiving back what you gave, but becoming greater because you gave. So if your child never looks back, let them go with grace. If they return, receive them with peace. But either way, let the center of your soul remain unmoved, rooted not in need, but in truth. Because at the heart of Confucius' wisdom is this: to demand love is weakness. To become love is power. You are not powerless in this story. You are the author of the only chapter that matters now, the one where you choose peace over pride and virtue over vengeance. What if, instead of waiting for your child to say thank you, you became the kind of presence that makes them feel it, even in silence? What if the legacy you leave isn't a list of things you did for them, but a quiet strength they carry long after you're gone? The kind of strength that one day makes them whisper to themselves, I didn't understand then, but now I do. If this message stirred something in your soul, don't let it fade into the next video. Like so that others know they're not alone. Comment and share the wisdom that resonates most with you. Subscribe, not to a channel, but to a community of souls seeking meaning beyond the surface. And above all, share this with someone who might need to hear that love doesn't end when gratitude is missing, because love, when true, becomes eternal.